event director here at the Booksmith. It's my absolute pleasure to be introducing M.T. Anderson and Kit Mayquist this evening. Give them a little round of applause. But I have a little housekeeping before we get to the main event. If you haven't yet picked up your pre-ordered book, or if you'd like to buy books, you can do so at the checkout at the end of the event. It's in the back of the event space there. Thank you for your support and for buying books with us. Next, we are live streaming this event from our trusty iPad over there. So if you don't want to be on camera, I would avoid that line of vision. The back of someone's head is not often good viewing, so please be mindful when you're walking in that area as well. Thank you. M.T. Anderson is the New York Times bestselling author of Feed, a National Book Award finalist and the winner of the LA Times Book Prize, The Astonishing Life of Octavian Nothing, Traitor to the Nation, winner of the 2006 National Book Award, and Symphony for the City of the Dead, Dmitri Shostakovich and the Siege of Leningrad, a Boston Globe Hornbook Honor Book, among many other books for children and young adults, including Elf, Dog, and Owlhead, which recently won a Newbery Honor. Yay! Moderator Kit Mayquist is a queer mystery author living in New England, where he loves finding new ways to explore the dark and beautiful side of nature and the shadows of American history. He has a master's degree in medieval history from the University of Iceland, you see why I asked him here this evening, and remains an active student for all things strange and bizarre. His debut novel, Tripping Arcadia, was published in 2022 by Dutton Penguin Random House and has been featured in Cosmopolitan, BuzzFeed, and Bellatrist. I've been eagerly awaiting this event for some time. I read Nicked as a galley months ago and fell absolutely in love with it. If you haven't read it yet, you're in for an absolute treat, especially if you're the kind of person who hears stealing a reliquary and says, "Tell me more," or if you know what a cynocephalus is. Cynocephalus heads, this one's for you. The year is 1087, and a pox is sweeping through the Italian port city of Bari. When a lowly monk is visited by St. Nicholas in his dreams, he interprets the vision as a call to action. But his superiors and the power brokers they serve have different plans for the tender-hearted brother Nicephorus. Enter Tune, a charismatic treasure hunter renowned for liberating holy relics from their tombs. The 700-year-old bones of St. Nicholas rest in distant Myra, Tune explains, and they're rumored to weep a mysterious liquid that can heal the sick. For the humble price of a small fortune, Tune will steal the bones and deliver them to Bari, curing the plague and restoring glory to the fallen city. And Nicephorus, the dreamer, will be his guide. What follows is a heist for the ages, as Nicephorus is swept away on strange tides and alongside even stranger bedfellows, to commit an act of sacrilege. Based on real historical accounts, Nicked is a wildly imaginative, genre-defying, and delightfully queer adventure full of romance, intrigue, and wide-eyed wonder at the world that awaits beyond our own borders. And now, without any further ado, I'll turn the stage over to M.T. Anderson and Kit Mayquist.
Thank you all for coming. It's so great I see some faces I haven't seen for decades. It's great to see everyone. Thank you. So I was going to start just by reading the first page, just to kind of get into the mood. I'm used to reading to children, so I feel like I should say, Nicked by M.T. Anderson. That's me. The monk heard that a ship had arrived carrying one of the dog-headed people, whom travelers speak of when they tell tall tales of the one-eyed and the winged, and he went out to the docks to see if it was true. This is how he first laid eyes on the relic thief. This is how the voyage to steal the corpse of St. Nicholas began. In an age of sickness, in a time of rage, in an epoch when tyrants take their seats beneath the white domes of capitals, I call upon St. Nicholas, gift-giver, light-bringer, wonder-worker, who saved the living from drowning and pasted together the dead from their pickling jars, who even after death gave of himself in medicinal ooze. I ask St. Nicholas to tell us a tale to pass a winter night, so that when we rise in the morning, we may feel resolute in the new dawn. I will tell the story of the heist of St. Nicholas's body from its tomb. I will tell it as it was told to me by musicians and drunkards and guidebooks and lovers. Though I am an unbeliever, I pray for faith. There you go.
Wow. Is this thing on? Okay, perfect.
Yeah.
Well, what a fantastic start. Amazing. As I think I mentioned, like I absolutely love everything about this book that you've written.
Thank you.
And so I wanted to start the event by just asking if you could please give us a pitch of, in your words, what Nicked is about.
Yes, the way I introduced it to people when I was working on it was, it's the strange but actually true story of the fact that, you know, in the Middle Ages, these two rival Italian cities, Venice and Bari, raced to try to be the first to steal the corpse of St. Nicholas from its tomb in what is now southern Turkey. And the reason they did that was because, supposedly, St. Nicholas's corpse oozed a magical liquor that if you drank it would heal anything. So that was kind of that was the way I pitched it to my agent. Yeah.
Amazing. I mean,
Yeah.
that's a pitch that would have got to me. I think I heard that there's another way that you pitched it, something about Ocean's 11.
Oh yeah. I said that it was like Ocean. I wanted to write something that was like Ocean's 11, if written by Umberto Eco. But the guy on NPR had it better. He was like Ocean's 11 for the 11th century. So right, yeah, he did a good job. Yeah.
I think it's very accurate.
Yeah.
So you have written a lot of books, a lot of amazing award-winning books, including the one that was just announced with the Newbery Honors. So congratulations again.
Thank you.
But this book is a little bit different than
Yeah.
what you've written before, and in one way that is different, it's your first adult novel.
Yeah.
So I wanted to ask about how that felt different as a writing process, and were there any kind of challenges or anything new with the writing process of this one?
So, I mean, I've written books before that I felt like were also for adults. You know, a lot of my books I feel like are for people who are like 15 years and then any older age than that. But this is the first time that it was a book that was like, I really am going to write something that may just not be of interest to teens at all. And like it's a book, you know, it's a book for people with mortgages. You know? So I just wanted to do something where, I guess where I didn't have to ever feel constrained by the question, what would interest a 16-year-old? I just only wanted to worry about like, where is this particular story going to take me? And I don't want it to seem like that. I mean, I don't feel that it is that it's bounded the interest of children or teenagers. I think that though that you speak differently when you are writing to them, and you also engage different parts of yourself. So you know the book that she was mentioning, Elf, Dog, and Owlhead, which is I mean it's a book for 10-year-olds. I didn't write that in a way that felt like somehow safer or bounded than writing this book. It came from a different part of me that was every bit as genuine as this. We all have different selves within us, and I feel like I write different books with those different selves.
Yeah, absolutely, and I mean, I think that there's, there are things that resonate no matter the age that we are. I mean, like, I was a 16-year-old who would have been absolutely interested in reliquaries and stealing the corpses of saints. So I don't think there's an age limit at all to anything. Some stories resonate to every audience, and I think you have a wonderful story.
Oh, well, thank you.
Yeah. So, in what way was the creative process for this kind of different, or how did you begin to write a novel like this?
Well, I mean, because it is based on real events. I mean, what happened was that I discovered that there was this. What happened was years and years ago, as a teenager, I loved then and still love classical music. I'm a huge classical music aficionado, and there are these pieces about St. Nicholas. Benjamin Britten's cantata St. Nicholas, which is for like school choirs and things, and then also there are these 4 monastic operas, literally kind of like sung episodes from his life that monks would have performed, in the 12th century. And they tell very different stories because our whole idea of Santa Claus, St. Nicholas, is 19th century. He was totally transformed then, Before then, was not from the North Pole, had nothing to do with reindeer or like claymation penguins or anything. You know what I mean? Like so there's this whole set of much more bizarre stories from his life, which was supposedly in the 3rd and 4th century. So stories like that he defeated a serial killer and then took the bodies of these boys that he found in pickling tubs and then reapplied the flesh to them and raised them from the dead, which is one of the reasons why he's associated with children. Yeah. One of the other reasons why he is associated with children is that he actually, he as a teenager, overheard his next door neighbor talking about the fact that he was going to have to sell his daughters to a brothel because he didn't have any money to pay for them anymore. And so St. Nicholas took 3 bags of gold on 3 successive nights and threw them secretly through the window. And therefore provided a dowry for each of the 3 daughters, who were then married off, I guess, in another more legal form of prostitution. But it was the 3rd century. What are you going to do? But anyway, and that's why he's associated with gift giving. Gift giving, when we give gifts at Christmas, we are essentially saying to our children, we can avoid selling you another year. So there was, to me, I was captivated. I'm sorry, this is a long answer.
Oh, no,
but
please keep
yeah.
I was going to ask you, why St. Nicholas?
Yeah, I mean, I'm not a fan of our version particularly, which feels, Santa Claus feels to me like a very strange kind of capitalist creature. But in this case, I was sort of excited by the peculiarity of these stories. Like, here are these stories that that people believed for and were current for about 1,300 years before then. He was altered. So I was like, maybe this could turn into a book. I said to myself as a young man, and then like 10, 15, I don't know, 20 years later, I was like, I should look that up. Find out more. So I looked it up, and I was reading a book about Nicholas, about Santa Claus, and it said that his corpse had been stolen. It said it just a passing paragraph said, oh yeah, at one time his corpse was stolen and taken to Italy by a bunch of relic thieves. And then it moved on to other things. I was like, wait a second. And it turned out that there are incredibly detailed narratives about the theft of this corpse. So one of them written by someone named Nicephorus, who calls himself the least monk of Bari. He wrote an account, and which I found online. You can, it's available in translation. So I read those and was sort of fascinated by that. That's when I started to kind of conceive of the plot. But I should also mention that along the way, there were 2 other very substantial accounts that had never been translated before. So I actually commissioned translations of those. And then at that point, unfortunately, I could not use all the information from them in this because I'd already started to write this and already had a kind of trashy Hollywood heist trajectory for some of it, and I was like, yeah, I'm not going to. But the next project is actually going to be a nonfiction thing for teens about the realities that could not fit in here because I learned about them too late. So there you go.
Love that.
Yeah. So sorry that was a long answer,
No.
but yeah.
I mean, I love your dedication to the story, commissioning translations.
You gotta go the distance, man.
Absolutely.
And this is sort of one of the things the book's about. There's all this weird crap out there in the world. The world is an extremely strange place, but you have to keep your nose to the ground to discover all of the kind of the hidden surprises and miracles around you. And it takes things like looking at stuff people haven't read for a long time.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I mean, the Middle Ages especially were a very weird time. There's a lot going on there.
Totally.
Do you have a favorite fact about St. Nicholas that you learned in all of this research? Or is there a story that you didn't get to include in the book?
One thing that's kind of fun about him is that he supposedly, one of the most likely things about him as a historical figure, that is to say, as Nicholas, the Bishop of Myra, is that he probably attended the Council of Nicaea, which, if those of you who've had a Christian background will know that the Nicene Creed was written there, but also the date of Easter was set there. So it's fun because Santa Claus set the date of Easter. I just think that's kind of cute.
Love that. Yeah. So, as someone with a background in medieval history, I absolutely loved this book. And I love the rich world that you've created as someone who spent a lot of time studying medieval history, reading these like old narratives and kind of
which is why, by the way, I think you're so perfect to actually do this
Thank you.
interview. I thought it was I was so excited by it.
I was telling you, like, I ate this up. Like, I love it. And you know, I'm someone who could just read the history books and the dry historical records, but like this really did bring that world to life in a way that I feel someone at the time would have felt about it and experienced it. And it's incredibly historical in a very, what I can only describe as like a delicious way. Your prose is amazing. The way you describe the different settings, the places that they travel to, and there's some other details I'm going to ask you about later. But what was it like bringing the 11th century specifically to life? Like, how did that feel? Because you do such an excellent job with it in this book.
Well, it was a pain in the ass, but for interesting reasons. So the idea is that I grew up with a very traditional, like Eurocentric idea of the Middle Ages, which I think most people my age did. I see, in fact, in the back is a former Dungeons and Dragons comrade of mine from when we were like 12 years old. So, and that world, the world of the Middle Ages, the world of fantasy even, was extremely based in a European sense of the Middle Ages. And in fact, like there was a somewhat hermetic, sealed sense to that, as if, for example, Europe did not have contact with the rest of the world during that time. It was just developing on its own, And I think I, like many people interested in the Middle Ages, kind of there was a shock after the some of the white supremacist riots of the 2010s, where suddenly we saw all of these elements of the European Middle Ages appearing in, like white supremacist documents and things. They were wearing like Crusader crosses or wearing, other symbols of the Middle Ages and that kind of thing. And it's sort of like, it was sort of a wake-up call, I think, for true medievalists, for people whose job that is, and also for classicists. Like, oh, wait a second, we've been teaching about this set of things. We didn't realize that all these people are actually taking this in a very different way. There's a kind of a white supremacist narrative about the Middle Ages, that this was a period when Europe could be its own pure self, untainted by anyone else. You know what I mean? Because communication was difficult after the fall of the Roman Empire, and there was something that felt like safe and ethnically pure about that. The peculiar thing being that, as you know, having studied in Iceland, like the Vikings, who are oftentimes sort of symbolic for that set of white supremacist people, the Vikings were some of the most like mobile people of that period. Like I think the majority of Viking hordes have coins from Baghdad in them, because it was the Vikings who were leading a sort of a slave trade that went down. I don't have a map. I'm sorry, but it went down that way, and then people came up, and So they went to the Middle East. So there was like the Vikings had direct contact with the Middle East. And in fact, that there were these kind of trade routes that went all the way across the continent. I mean, stuff from even as far as like the Tang Dynasty and the Song Dynasty was making its way in China, was making its way all the way into Western Europe. Like the Pope wrote letters to Genghis Khan saying, hey, I hear you've been conquering a lot of the world. You should know I am God's representative on earth. If you would like to pay obeisance to me, I'm totally open to that. And Genghis Khan, who turned out to be dead by the time the letter actually reached him, one of his sons wrote back and he said, thanks, hey Pope, thanks for your letter. Great to hear from you. I'm, as it happens, I rule everything from where the sun rises to where the sun sets. So the gods of the Mongols are doing pretty well for me. But if you would actually like to pay obeisance to me, then maybe Italy won't be overrun and you won't be killed. So, like, we have all this communication. So, but to get back to your question, so recreating, what I wanted to do was to create, to look at this geographical part of the 11th century in Byzantium, which is now somewhat in the areas of Greece and Turkey, basically. And I wanted to say, like, this is this melting pot place that is truly at the center of the world. And previously, scholarship always treated it as sort of like, yeah, it's that place that's kind of, it's nowhere. It's not in the Middle East, it's not European exactly. And instead of seeing it as this place that has disappeared, it's in the middle of nowhere, what if instead you see it as they themselves saw it, which is this is the center of the world. This is the crosshairs where everything is passing through this. And so you have like all of the world's cultures at a boil in this place. And so that is what I wanted to do, to find a way to depict all of that kind of syncretism and that exciting moment of like all these different religions, cultures slamming into each other right at this spot, which was very hard because in fact, you start to realize that the more you find out about any given people, the more they fragment into different sets of people who then also have to be researched. I'm thinking of, for example, the Seljuk Turks, who I refer to in there, who very complicatedly have all of these layers of, like, they've just been Islamicized, so they have these layers of, like, Arabic culture and Persian culture and their own kind of steppe culture and blah, blah, blah. It was a real headache. So, like, the whole thing was kind of at once a joyous discovery, and also all these things about sort of like, well, how do I actually thread any of these needles? How do I use this in a way that's going to be lively and that is going to be as immediate as it is when you're walking down the street, seeing people around you and thinking about their lives and guessing at who they are and that kind of thing.
Yeah, I mean, the medieval period, the Middle Ages, there was so much happening all the time. And to your earlier point, like studying in Iceland, one of the most interesting things that I learned in my first kind of year there was the whole Vikings going down, and they were the Varangian guards in Constantinople at the time, and they traded Egyptian beads, and I mean,
There are Viking epics about Constantinople, about the Aegean and the Mediterranean.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So I mean, everyone was moving all the time. So much trade, and so in addition to creating this like rich world that is very historical with the people and the history of the places, you also include many details that to our modern lens kind of bend more toward fantasy, right? So there's things like Cynocephalus and...
Which is a dog-headed person.
Dog-headed person, which was in narratives for 1,000 years. Like they were real to the medieval audience. And they're very real in this book. And so, so I wanted to just ask you, you said that you wanted to write willful inaccuracies demanded by the Middle Ages, or by a Middle Age audience themselves. Do you have a favorite of these willful inaccuracies that you were able to include in your book?
Well, I'm trying to think. Because my idea was I kind of wanted to write a historical, I think of it as a historical novel, but using their sense of what a historical document is, right? So, historians now look at, saints' lives or whatever, and they take out of them, the 4 sentences that are about, grain yields, or, the route that you took from Chartres or something. And they ignore all of the part that the medieval person would have found important, which is, here's a person who raised people from the dead and, had angels riding on his shoulders or whatever. You know what I mean? So I was like, no, I'm going to restore, if I'm going to write a medieval historical novel, I want to actually pay tribute to their sense of what nonfiction is. Their nonfiction documents, they just include a lot of details we probably wouldn't. So, and just as you mentioned, one of my favorite things was in fact the dog-headed men. You read in, for 1,000 years or more, people talk about the dog-headed men. So Herodotus mentions them. In China, in the classic of Mountains and Seas, they talk about the dog-headed men being far to the west. And then all of the European sources mention the dog-headed men being far to the east. So I'm like, well, they're clearly somewhere in the middle. Like, that seems far more reliable than the fact that, like, hardly anyone talks about, like, the occupation of Anatolia by the Seljuk Turks. That doesn't come up a lot, but the dog-headed men, they're very certain about that. So it's like, well, I have to kind of acknowledge their view of these things. I'm trying to think of, oh, I know. So one of my favorite stories in there is there's a Saint Anastasia who I learned about as I was writing the book, who she was the daughter of the innkeeper at the inn where Mary and Joseph couldn't find room. And so that night, as the Christ child was born, she was born without hands. That's an important part of the story. She was born without hands. And that night, supposedly when the Christ child was born, she went out and she wanted to cradle the baby, but she couldn't because she had no hands. And so angels came down and delivered a pair of hands to her, which she just affixed and then used to give Mary, like, it's very, very sweet, because the idea is she was like stinting Mary. Like, Mary had this newborn, and this young woman wanted to kind of like, take care of the kid for a bit. So anyway, I think that was one of my favorite weird medieval stories I was able to include.
Saint stories are always kind of the weirdest, I feel like. And even with the cytocephaly, I know, like, I think it's Saint Christopher is depicted sometimes as a cytocephaly.
Yeah. In Byzantine, like, he, the name Reprobus, which is the name of the dog-headed man in that, is in fact the name for Saint Christopher before he's converted in those like Byzantine stories about Saint Christopher supposedly, according to, there's a very sweet story about Saint Christopher who, before he's converted, has a dog head. He goes to the church and he has this staff and he lays it down in front of the altar as an offering. And I was like, what is this about? And then sometimes just, holy crap, he's like delivering a stick. It's a dog putting a stick in front of his master. That's kind of like but anyway, yeah, and he unfortunately in the Byzantine sources, he has a bad end. But anyway, there you go.
Yeah. So since we're talking about saints, saints and their very strange history, I want to highlight the fact that, cities and monasteries really did this, didn't they? Like what's depicted in this book. They had competitions about relics, they stole relics. It was very important to the medieval audience and to the pilgrims who would venture to these places and also to the cities for their money. It was a source of income for them, right? So they really did this. Can you tell us more about the history of that and what you learned when writing this book?
Yeah, totally. And I mean, so for example, one of the ways we know about this is that we know about this story of the heist in particular, is that we actually have the expense records that show that all of the sailors who took part in this were given money, in perpetuity. They were given a cut of the pilgrimage fees. So what they did is, like, the boat with the corpse gets back to the city of Bari, and an abbot comes aboard and is like, well, I'm ready to take the body from you. And they're like, no, you're not. First, you're signing a contract that says what are our rights as those who have brought the body. And so we actually have the legal documents involved that say, like, you're going to get a cut. You and your descendants will get a cut every year of the pilgrimage fees. And so we have one from like 100 years later where their families are still getting money for the pilgrimage. So it's totally real, right? Like they're getting like a little annuity each year from pilgrimage. And a lot of it is a response to something that happened during the historical Nicholas of Myra's life, which was the so-called Great Persecution of Diocletian. So it's a period when the Roman Empire turned suddenly very anti-Christian, and so there were a lot of Christians being sort of tortured and killed and that kind of thing. And as a result, the direction that Christianity took was sort of like, let's turn that generation of people into saints who are prayed to, who have their victory in defeat, which is one thing that was fascinating about Christianity, was the idea that victory and defeat are kind of like swiveled. And as you probably know, made it very hard to sell them to the Vikings, 500 years later, because they're like, what do you mean you want us to worship the God who loses? That doesn't seem like a great idea.
Not good marketing.
Not good marketing. No, so this is not connected with the book, but there's a fascinating translation of the Bible used for the conversion of Vikings, where, like, for example, like the part where one of the disciples, Christ's disciples, cuts off a guy's ear, and then Christ kind of heals him. Instead, it's turned into this big, like, battle scene where they're, like the ear is like gushing gore, and so the idea is, no, he's choosing not to like win in battle here.
I love that, like, people have always been people,
Yeah.
in terms of, the conversations that happen around this. And I know in the book, there's one of my favorite conversations is at the start, they're kind of talking about, like, well, why is it fair that this city gets 5 corpses, 5 relics, and why do they don't need St. Nicholas, like, we need him, they already get all the money, they have too many saints already.
And there are real conversations like that.
Yeah, and kind of like the marketing, we gotta make this into a fight in order to appeal to everyone, yeah. But since we're talking about relics, do you have a favorite relic?
Well, one of the ones that I read about that I really loved was someone tried to sell the skull of Christ as a child. Think about that one for a minute. Whereas, so we were talking about ahead of time about the fact that, like, it presented a real irritation to relic sellers that Christ had ascended, because it meant that there could be no relics of his, except his foreskin and fingernails. So they did try their best with those.
Milk tooth.
Okay. Oh, good idea.
I forget which town. There's a town in Spain that kept saying they had the milk tooth of Christ. So.
All right. There you think on your feet. That's great.
Yeah. Whatever it takes. Yeah. So, just thinking of what a wild time that was. It must have been back then. So, Nicked is a queer romance between a monk and a treasure hunter, and but there's a lot going on between them as well in terms of philosophically and in the way that they see the world, in terms of religion. They live very different lives, and even when they're kind of together on this journey, they're living very different kind of worldviews and reacting to things that are very different. So can you tell us more about what readers can kind of expect between our 2 protagonists here?
I have to say this is an honor I never thought that I would get, but the LA Times did call it one of the 15 hottest romances of the summer, which is not what you expect for a book about the theft of a corpse.
It could be though.
Are you saying that maybe the other 14 are really, like the other romance novels are really... There we go. There's the secret sauce for you. What I thought of it as is in, like, noir novels, all these noir novels I love, like the Maltese Falcon, which is, if you think about it, also a story about the theft of a Mediterranean medieval object, right? In those stories, you always have like the detective and the client always have this tension, and it's a tension where they simultaneously are kind of attracted to each other, and yet at the same time, they have really good reasons to betray each other. And I think that this kind of falls into that, that even though betrayal is not super hot in reality, it actually is in fiction. So in the noir novel, I felt like that was something that really should be there. Yeah, and I immediately knew that I wanted that to be a portion of the story, that there would be kind of a budding romance that might be a betrayal in the course of it.
I mean, I can assure you it's hot and Nick too.
Oh, so. Good. Good.
Well, it was an absolute pleasure to read this. I mean, you are a master of prose here, and like I said, it was a delicious read, both as a historian and as just a lover of, I guess, corpses. Magical ones, anyway. So if you had to give one piece of advice.
He lives in Providence, so they have a really good, a really good history of corpses down in Providence. Sort of Lovecraftian, scenery. They do corpses well down there.
Come to Providence, see the
Yeah.
corpses.
Well, Rhode Island is also full of corpses because of the mobsters and lobsters thing, right? So, yeah.
True, yeah.
Yeah, so, there you go. Sorry, I
A
interrupted.
new marketing tactic.
Totally. Come here, find your corpse. Yeah.
But, okay, if you had one piece of advice to writers, not for just marketing purposes and getting people to visit corpses, what would your piece of advice be?
Well, I guess one would be to actually write. Like it's like it oftentimes doesn't feel like it's time to start. And then if you actually do start, you'll find yourself pulling more and more out. More and more out of yourself, I guess is what I mean. I used to feel, I guess when I was younger and more energetic, I used to feel like, this story has to be told now, and I'd sit down, except I take two hands. But but I feel like, especially as I've gotten older and now I feel ready to be in knowing that that's fine. And it doesn't matter, like if you actually write 6 pages and decide that, I really wasn't ready, then you stop. You never have to look at that version again. You know what I mean? Like nothing's gonna get hurt by you starting too early, but things can fall apart by you waiting too long. So that's what I would say to writers, is to actually write. And the other thing is, in fact, to look around you for all the fascinating details of your world that are right around you, waiting to be thought about and talked about. I mean, it doesn't have to be the peculiar like necrophiliac elements of Providence, Rhode Island. It's the but like my town in Vermont. I come from a very small town in Vermont, but there is a church there, for example, where a bunch of people gathered in 1843, waiting for the world to end, and believed that the world was going to end, and they dragged a grandfather clock up to the front of the church, and it was counting down like the final moments of time, which rang at midnight, and then time kept on going, and they panicked because many of them had not sowed any crops that summer, because why do you need to when you're not going to be eating by the winter? They'd given their land away because who's going to need land? We all have our mansion awaiting us in heaven. So it emptied the town, because all these people had to move west to Ohio. That's right there, and there's a in the graveyard near where I lived in this town, there's an obelisk in the graveyard that just says "the old nuisance." You know what I mean? I don't know what the story is, but I mean, there sure as heck is a story there. So look around you, and you'll discover all these wonderful things hidden around you, and sometimes not wonderful, sometimes also painful things about the place you live and the history of the place as well. And those painful realities have to be acknowledged too, if you're going to understand the place and live in it as a full citizen. So that's what I would say. Yeah.
Thank you. And I do want to know the story of that obelisk. I'm very curious now.
Well, the one that I heard, I don't know if it's real, but the story was that I can't tell if it was made up after the fact by someone, but the story I heard was that it was a wealthy guy in town. He had 2 sons, and as he was dying, he heard one of them say, we'll be able to sell this place once the old nuisance is dead. So he secretly had that carved on the stone, and then also deeded the house to someone else, not to his sons at all. So they both were screwed out of the inheritance. So I love that story. I don't know if it's true, because that's just the story on the on the street, the unpaved muddy street. So yeah.
What a nuisance indeed.
Yeah.
But speaking of the town that you live in, Vermont, I've heard that you live in a haunted house.
Yeah, I mean, I don't believe in ghosts, but yeah, I was told before I moved in that it was haunted, and that there was a child would wail outside the bedroom window. And I was like, well, I sleep with silicone earplugs anyway, so not my problem.
What's wrong with that?
And I found letters from the kids who lived in the house to the ghost under the floorboards.
Aww.
So they had it was totally sweet because they had slipped them between the floorboards because they were thinking that must be kind of like the mail slot for ghosts. Like somehow the ghosts are associated with the house, so you have to put them so that's why they were still there. But I have to say, like, here's the letter that this little girl wrote to the ghost. It goes, "Dear ghost, I love you. I think you are cute. I hope your mom buys you a corgi so you can ride on it. Do you like to ice skate?" So there you go. It was, yeah. So Vermont being what it is, I actually found that girl who is, a person of my age now. And she told me the wild story of the house and everything. It was very, very cool. It was really, but once again, you find the strange little thing and then you follow it up to sort of discover what hidden worlds are all around us.
Yeah, there really are stories just everywhere you look. Maybe not all of us have haunted houses with letters to ghosts, but
We have a haunted city.
we do have a haunted city. There's a lot of hauntings in New England, especially.
Yeah.
So, well, thank you so much. This has been an absolutely wonderful conversation. And I mean, like I said, I absolutely adore your book.
Thank you so much for doing
fantastic. Yeah, thank you so much for having me. Could you tell us where we can find you online, on social media? Where can we find you if you don't want to send letters in between the floors?
Yes, I have a website. It's at mtanderson.com. And that has information there. Yeah. Well, thank you very much, all of you, for coming. Great to see you all.
To audience questions, if that's okay.
Oh, sure.
All right, does anyone have any questions?
I think historical fiction is extremely frightening to write because at no point will you ever get it completely right because there's no completely right version. And you've written a bunch of historical fiction. So at what point do you let go of the research process and just commit to the story?
I keep on doing research and reading about the period while I'm writing it. So because you never know what weird little detail, I especially will switch more to social history while I'm doing the writing, because that's what you're more likely to actually engage with in the writing itself. But so that's when I'll still be reading books on the outfit or the cuisine or whatever else. Because you want to kind of keep yourself infused with that even as you're writing. You never know what little detail will be the thing that makes you go, oh yeah. Because so much of historical fiction is thinking through the physical realities of what seems abstract. Like when I did a couple of books about the 18th century in Boston. And stuff like the stamp tax seems very, very abstract. Why do people get so angry about the stamp tax? And then you read about what a burden it is, bureaucratically, and you're like, oh, if you actually think about it. So you have to kind of embody the play as you're reading continually about the social history of the period. Helps you do that, even as you're writing along.
So the prose in this almost kind of read more medieval. Was that intentional?
Yeah, sure. Yeah. No, because I feel like our world is formed by the language we speak. We don't realize the extent to which everything we even see is parsed out by the concepts we already have. The example I often think about with this one is, from when I was working on that 18th century book, what you talk about when you talk about the human race is you're this is the destiny of man. And it's important in a weird way that leaves out more than half the human race. There's something cognitively important about the fact that using the phrase man for humanity, that's a very 18th century thing to take for granted the fact that guys are the center of stuff, and so I feel you have to use some of the language and participate in the way that people are thinking and feeling in the period. I really tried to notice how do people describe their own feelings in any given period, because they don't feel the same way that we do. The structure of the kinds of things they feel, it's different even from, from my childhood to the present, and I find, and that's why I would want to write historical fiction, is to say, I want to explore difference. I want to explore the strangeness of distance between me and these other people. And so that's why I guess it was important for me to use some of that language, but at the same time to acknowledge that in that period there are different registers. There's just as there are now. Like sailors are not going to talk the same way as the Archbishop of Canterbury, And so, and how the thing is that how do you finesse that, Yeah. Yes.
I hope that you'll talk for a second about Feed, because Feed's an important book to me, and
Thank you.
It's so different from so many of your other books. It's just a different animal altogether. So, how did you come to write Feed?
Yeah. So Feed is a book of mine that was written, bizarrely enough now, back in 2002, which is about a world in which everyone has an internet connection in their head, which means that they can do they have all this internet functionality, which is great, but they also have like a stream of advertising going through their thoughts constantly. And and that was, I think a lot of my satirical books are written pure, like the first and main thing is like a sense of anger, just of kind of frustrated anger. And that, in the case of that book, it really was feeling like ever since I've been a teenager, and I was at the time, 32, ever since I've been a teenager, I've had sort of the voice of advertising in my head. It's telling me like, if you do this, if you buy this, then you'll be loved, then you'll be fulfilled, then you will be a whole person. And again, I think that it was really my rage at that. It was specifically an editor, I went to a party in New York and an editor said, I need a short story about literacy for a collection that's going to benefit a literacy foundation. And I was on the train on the way back, and it was the very, very early days of cell phones when it was still performative to talk loudly on the train with a cell phone. And and so I was just thinking like, good God, what would it be like if we were connected all the time? Little did I know. So that's sort of how it came about. But it was really like that book, the Octavian Nothing books, which are the 18th century things, my book, Landscape with Invisible Hand, which is another science fiction satire. All of those really were written out of anger, I would say, primarily. Like wanting to throttle something that I felt was deeply damaging to all of us that no one was talking about. Yes?
I'm just curious, maybe it's like your journey in this book. Have you visited any places?
Oh yeah, good question. Yeah, I've been both to Myra, which is now called Demre, Turkey, which is where the bones were stolen from, and to Bari, where they were taken and where they still reside. And in fact, every year on the anniversary of the day that the bones arrived, which is May 9th, they have a big ceremony where, down in the crypt, they open up the altar. There's a metal plate there with some plumbing underneath it that reaches all the way down into his coffin, and they actually squeegee up some liquid, which they still distribute in holy water, hundreds of bottles of holy water that are then sold for thousands of euros to Russian and Ukrainian tourists. So yeah, it's so. But in particular, the trip to Turkey, which was one of the first things that happened, deeply moved me. I mean, that landscape is fantastic because you have every layer of human civilization, one after the other, all right there, all speaking to each other. You have these, sort of pre-Greek tombs that then the Greeks are then using, and then the Romans are using, and then the Christians are reusing them. And like you have these cities that like you can read about in classical sources that are ruined, but then have had medieval things built in the middle of them. It's just like the sense of that layering is so powerful and so beautiful. And I really recommend that southern coast of Turkey. Also, the waters are super blue. The word turquoise literally means the blue that is off the coast of Turkey. Yeah, beautiful blue waters. I went swimming in ruins, like you're gliding along, like over kind of an agora, a ruined agora under the water. Super, super fun. Go! Okay, well, one more question, because I don't want people to feel that they're being held hostage. Yes?
Okay, so you talked a lot about sort of like the details that you weren't able to include, the details that helped shape the narrative in certain directions.
Yeah.
What did you do if you came across a detail, a historical piece of fact that you looked at and went, oh, dang it, I completely conceptualized my story in another direction?
Yeah, well, which did happen, right? I mean, it actually did happen because I came across a lot of these things when I was halfway through writing this. And I think previously, like for the Octavian Nothing books, which are these books set in the 18th century, I've been incredibly careful about always getting all of the chronology as right as I could get it, despite the fact that there happens to be a Revolutionary War expert in the audience. He will tell you it was a long, long, long war if you look at it as like the time, and I was just like, oh, why can't I drop like 5 months here and there? But I didn't, right? I always tried to be a good boy. Here I was like, nah, screw it. I'm gonna try to, if there's something, I'm gonna give myself more freedom to change things that are inconvenient. And in particular, that's part of the reason why I decided to do like a nonfiction book after this, because I was like, there's a whole other way of seeing this story that I did not know existed when I began this. And so that sort of my solution was, in a way, a self-indulgent one, which is, I'll do it twice, 2 different ways, you know? But, and I think your answer as a writer is going to be very different depending on the kind of project you're working on. Some projects are going to flourish more if you allow them to breathe more. Some, that strictness is like sonnet form, and you'll discover beauties by following the real historical record. Well, thank you once again, all of you. Thank you for coming.
Thank you both. This was wonderful. We have books for sale in the